Let's start. Welcome everybody. Good morning, good evening, or good afternoon. Welcome at the webinar Perspectives from the Dark Side, Making the Transition from Academia to Industry. We organized this webinar on behalf of the NESI committee. And now my PowerPoint is not working. There we are. The network of early careers and students from ISBNPA. Together with Sophie Kompernolle and I will host this webinar. And this webinar is on when you want to leave academia. Maybe you finish your PhD or you're currently working on your PhD and your postdoc and thinking about what are you going to do afterwards. Do you want to stay in academia or you will go transfer, jump ships and do something else? So how can we know better what to do? And we thought we just have to ask two experts on this. So we have two experts, previous postdoctoral researchers from CEDAR at the University of Cambridge in the United Kingdom, and they both switched after their postdoc to the industry. So, and they're gonna tell us a bit more about their experience, but also give us tips and tricks how we should transfer from academia to the industry. Today we have Dr. Katie Morton. She's from Innovia Technology in the United Kingdom, and also Dr. Rick Prins from Minddistrict in Amsterdam in the Netherlands. And they both will tell you more about their experiences and give you tips and tricks. But before they will start, I will give you a few just suggestions and tips for this webinar, how to send questions to the presenters. You have a chat function in the Zoom and also a Q&A function. And you can ask your question directly to Katie and Rick, but we want to ask you to also put Sophie and myself, Maartje, into the question section. So if we have too many questions, we can select the questions and send them to Katie and to Rick. For now, I would like to ask Katie to give her presentation. And of course, she will first introduce herself a bit further. And afterwards, there are also many time for discussions, both with Katie and with Rick. I hope you enjoy the webinar and we talk to each other at the end of the presentations.
Okay, thank you. So Rick and I will be planning to talk for about 15 minutes each. I'm just going to do a brief couple of introduction slides and then hand over to Rick, and then I'll come back to me in the second part. So although the title we've talked about making the transition from academia to industry, I actually think a lot of what we're saying probably applies to moving to other areas as well. So potentially other public sector jobs outside of academia, for example, working in policy as well. And I think that even if you've joined the webinar just out of curiosity, and even if you think you're probably not planning on leaving academia, I think we've tried to cover things that hopefully will also be relevant. And also, if you might end up deciding that after you hear myself and Rick talk about it, that you probably do want to stay in academia. And hopefully we've tried to put together a really honest account of our experiences and the ups and downs that have gone with it during this time. So just as a brief background, you probably already know the stats that around 50% of students or PhD students leave after the completion of their studies, with generally only 15 to 20% of postdocs going on to a tenure track position. So one key theme for our talk today is that leaving academia shouldn't really feel like a taboo topic. And if you take one thing away from this webinar, in that it's not admitting defeat, and a change can be a good thing, then hopefully that will be what we set out to achieve. And I think generally, when I was chatting to Rick earlier this week, that the problem with academic culture in general is that people aren't really trained to think that our skill set can be applied to anything outside of really this specialized field that we might have devoted kind of 10, maybe even more than 10 years to. And so hopefully the aim of this webinar is to provide some different perspectives from myself and Rick's experiences and try and give some hopefully useful tips and tricks. So with that, I'll hand over to Rick for his part, and then I'll speak again in a little while.
Yes. Yeah. So thank you, Katie. So I'm Rick Prins, and after 10 years in academia, I now work for a commercial e-health company called Minddistrict. And I'm also on the a member at large at the executive committee of ISBNPA. And actually, before I really start with my talk, I also want to point you to an excellent weblog of a former ISBNPA president, Kylie Ball, which is the Happy Academic. And she gives loads of good career tips for academics, for early career researchers on her weblog. For instance, why shouldn't you have a career plan? So I will now start with an overview of my own career as a background, and maybe my career is really familiar. Oh, well, it's maybe very similar to yours. So after actually graduating from human movement sciences, I started at a commercial company called Lifeguard as a product developer. Soon after that, I went to the Department of Public Health at the Erasmus Medical Center in Rotterdam and did my PhD over there. I also did my one postdoctoral position in Rotterdam, and then I made a big transition to the other side of the North Sea, to the United Kingdom, and worked as a career development fellow at CEDAR, the MSc Epidemiology unit in Cambridge. And then actually a very big transition from academia to industry is what I made. So I started in 2016, a bit over a year ago, as a researcher at Minddistrict, an e-health company in Amsterdam. And from that position, I moved towards a new position, which is well, it's a new position. So the title is not finished yet. It's I'm combining intervention development and data to actually personalize content further. So in my Rotterdam period, it looks like I'm an artist, I'm not, but my Rotterdam period, I did my PhD, which was on environmental influences on physical activity among adolescents. And I also developed a computer-tailored e-health intervention in this to promote physical activity among adolescents. During my PhD, I got funding. I got my own funding to actually fund my own postdoctoral position over here to change physical and social environmental factors to promote walking among elderly. And these are not elderly, but we introduced a walking route, and the children made route markers for the walking route. And then a nice position came up, a nice opportunity to work at CEDAR, the University of Cambridge, with Dr. David Ogilvie, and to study the mechanisms by which cycling infrastructure actually impacts cycling behavior. And we also studied the impacts of this motorway on local residents' health and behavior. During that period, I was also elected as a member at large at ISBNPA. So I did pretty well. Actually, my HATE index was very good. I worked at top institutes, got my own funding, was active in academic society. So everything was really good. So why then this transition? Well, that's really because the University of Cambridge cares about careers of its researchers. And this building is the career service at the University of Cambridge. And through a series of lectures and workshops, I became to realize that there is a world next to academia. And thus far, I actually deliberately focused on my CV, on the stuff that I really did. But I am much more than my CV. I do have my values, I do have my family, my context. I have things that I care about and like. And these are not necessarily directly reflected in my CV. And a lot is. And I put a lot of emphasis on the stuff that I like in my work. But the thing that's very important to me, and I became to realize this more and more, is that the academic path is kind of a default option. It was a default option for me. And I never thought of something really else. For instance, my innovative drive didn't seem to really fit well with academia all the time. I wanted to make two jumps that were too big for academia. I couldn't sometimes really find I was really trying to make leaps, and that's hard to get funded sometimes. And in industry, that's actually easier. So I actually decided to look further, and if you look further, it's really important to consider what skill set you do have. So what do you need, and what do you need to strengthen? And I actually decided to strengthen skills around programming. I did this through various courses that the University of Cambridge offered, but also on Coursera, which is a massive open online course. And what really happened to be very important is that I had my Raspberry Pi, which is a mini computer, and I did some hobby projects on it. So I went to a tech company, an e-health company, and they really valued the experimental stuff that I was doing on the Raspberry Pi, which was like scraping websites to answer a question on what's the best time to publish your research. So the tech guys that were on the interview process of Minddistrict really liked that. Another thing that I did during my career, and I already did this during my time in Rotterdam, was doing some consultancy for municipalities and other companies on how to actually develop interventions, e-health interventions as well. And I also gave advice to the municipality of Cambridge during the period in Cambridge. So maybe that was already a sign that I was interested in a career outside of academia. So now that I was really prepared, what did I actually do to land the job at Minddistrict? Well, as you know, that I really focused on really knowing what I really wanted to do, who I am. I talked to career service, did a lot of tests like personality tests, etc. I talked to senior researchers about this. And at that point, I was not really looking for a job. I was just preparing for it. So I did some branding as well. One of the things that I had at least a CV of more than 5 pages. And I think a lot of academic CVs are like that. But in business, they really want kind of 2-page CVs in which you summarize what you did. So that's what I really changed. On LinkedIn, I did the opposite actually. So I actually expanded my LinkedIn profile because a lot of recruiters search for keywords. And I wanted to make sure that they would find me if it was relevant for them as well. And then on a dull Thursday night, LinkedIn suggested a job to me at a company called Minddistrict. And this job fitted very well, and I actually decided to apply for it. With my brand new CV and in my letter, I really explained why I wanted this transition from research to academia. I think that's really important to really say why you want to make this transition. And for me, it was actually that I wanted to make more impact with my research and add some innovation in my life as well. So in prepping for the interview and actually the letter, I really looked at their website, read their blog posts. The Minddistrict has a YouTube channel. I watched the videos. I read white papers. So I really wanted to know the company well before I stepped through the door. And actually the interview was really nice. They were really kind and it was a match, and I got a job. And then there is the actual transition. And I think this is a nice graphic that really shows you what actually can happen in a process of transition. So this phase, the anxiety phase, is really that you start to like, okay, I need to change, but yeah, what do I need to do? You start to maybe be a bit grumpy about your work, and then in the happiness phase, actually you find some acknowledgement from people around you. Yeah, maybe you should change, and you're happy, and etc. But one of the dangers over there at that phase is that that change seems to be the only option that you have, and that's really dangerous. Sometimes it's just tweaking a little bit in your career, and then you can move on. A phase that I've been in as well is this fear threat phase. So that's if you make a big transition, that's really something that's counter. That's something that human beings do not really want to do, big changes. So you start to get feelings of fear and threat. That's just to resist the change. And this may actually go down very well to kind of depression is maybe a big word, but you may really feel like, oh, well, what did I really do? But if you carry on, there will be gradual acceptance. You will actually see that your job is working, and you keep moving forward. This phase over here, this disillusionment, is a very important issue, I think, in this process of transition, because actually this phase tells that your values, your own values, do not match the values of the company that you're in or the change that you made. And I think that's really important. If that happens, you should probably indeed leave. So if your values do not match with the company's, that would mean that you should change jobs, and that can happen, and that's perfectly fine as well. Just dare to change, I would say. And actually now I'm working for Minddistrict, and I already briefly touched upon Minddistrict. We are an e-health company, and we deliver e-health mainly to mental health care institutions. So we are actually helping to treat things like depression, anxiety disorders, etc. The idea of our product is not that we are offering self-help or standalone e-health, like a lot of the papers that we publish in the journal do, but rather we believe in a concept called blended treatment. So actually that means that a therapist, a psychiatrist, or a psychologist actually does have face-to-face sessions and combine it with e-health sessions. So this is an example of an e-health module at our platform. Always has a nice picture at the top. There's a lot of text and videos. There are exercises in it. And actually we've got like 200 different modules, 200 different e-health interventions, treating everything from depression to stuff like domestic violence. Currently, we are actually working on transforming from a browser-based version to app-based, so more mHealth interventions, and really trying to personalize this much further. So actually, what the idea is that we can treat anxiety disorders and depression at the same time, which is a novel thing in mental health care, actually. The nice thing, I think, is that we are doing this in a multidisciplinary team. So there are psychologists, designers, developers, like software developers, but also analysts working together to get the right intervention. And that's the way that we can actually deliver a high quality intervention, I think. And by the way, we are using the intervention mapping protocol for this. That some of you may know this, but we are this protocol in developing intervention. So we are using it as well. So what are my experiences actually? So now you know a bit about the company. What do I actually do? So at the moment I'm leading the team of a team of intervention developers, and I'm setting up a team on data analysis, and I'm trying to merge them. So I'm actually on the board as well to represent intervention development. And I do have board meetings in which we develop our vision, but also run the day-to-day business. And I'm also leading the team of intervention development and data. So I'm doing a lot of line management as well. That takes up quite a lot of time, but I'm in the luxurious position that I also work a lot on, I can really get my hands dirty on data. The nice thing about working at a small company, but also the difficult thing, is that if you look at my hands-on activities, it's really all over the place. It's actually doing everything that a normal research institute would have teams on. So I'm working on ethics stuff, like I introduced some informed consent thing. I'm making sure that our data collection is legal. And I do this together with the legal officer. But I'm representing the data part in there as well. I'm making sure that the infrastructure, that means that the way that we store our data on our web service is right, is stable, is state of the art, and that we can actually access it and that the data is meaningful. So if that's all set up and done, I can run my analysis, and I'm running analysis on a very broad range of things. So I'm not just studying effectiveness, but I'm also looking at the use of our platform. I'm helping developers to make decisions. I'm doing currently I'm looking at the validity of one of our questionnaires that we've developed ourselves. And what we are doing to personalize our product further is actually to use analytical algorithms in our product. So I'm working on that as well. So that's a pretty broad overview. You can imagine that my week is really full of this. So which transferable skills do I use on a day-to-day basis? Well, so these are skills that I actually built up during my time in academia. I think that's project management. I mean, if you can actually manage your PhD project, I think you can't say that you can't do any project management. I brought my analytical mindset, the ability to solve really complex problems. The same goes for time management, which you probably also developed during your PhD already. Presenting, well, I'm presenting all the time. And that's a very valuable skill that I really use a lot in the company. And then there are things like statistics in Python or R in my case, writing and reading academic papers. So I'm really, a lot of business people ask like for support for a lot of the things that we've developed. So I actually am reading a lot of academic papers to help them to build the support. And I was actually hired for some trial management skills as well as a researcher. So is it really dark and evil and all about the money? Well, yes, we need to make money to survive. And sales is really a driver in product decisions. But Minddistrict really truly aims to do good for people with mental health conditions, which is in our corporate message as well. We try to empower people to master their own well-being. One of the tips that I really have is if you decide to apply for a job, it's very important to read the mission statement, corporate messages, white papers, etc. of a company. Or if you are in an interview, you may ask for their key performance indicators. They tell you an awful lot what's important to the company. And it's very important that you pick a company that fits with your values. Otherwise, you won't stay there for long. So what are my pros and cons? Well, there is a lot of change going on in a company, and that may be much faster than in academia, which we typically run large trials. So you do have less control of your own planning, and it's not always possible to deliver the top quality that you're used to in academia. Good enough is good enough. In my case, there is also much less formal professional development going on, which I think is a pity. on the other side, all of my research has direct impact, and that's what I really, really like. Also, the working in multidisciplinary teams is really nice, and although there is less formal professional development, in my case, there's a lot of informal professional development. So like improving coding, etc., or programming. And I do have a lot of responsibility, which is really different from academia. In academia, there's always somebody on a position, on a higher position than you are. At Minddistrict, it's pretty flat. So everybody has responsibility, which makes it nice for me. I think one of the key messages that I really want to give you is act according to your values and really think what makes you tick to actually decide what you're going to do. So I hope that you get this from my talk. And now I want to hand over to Katie again.
Okay, thanks, Rick. So like Rick, I was working also as a postdoc in CEDAR until September 2016, when I left to work as an innovation consultant, well, specifically in behavioural science at a company called Innovia Technology in Cambridge. So I'll just give a brief background to my academic career. So initially, I studied sports science and social sciences, followed by a master's in sport and exercise psychology, and this was at Loughborough University. And following this, I moved abroad to Canada to do a PhD at the University of British Columbia with Mark Beauchamp. And my PhD was definitely some of the best years of my life, actually. I really had a great time. I liked the North American system. I think even though it probably took longer than a PhD potentially in the UK, I felt like I got exposure to a lot more courses. I had TA experience. I had experiences in teaching. I think this made me realise initially that I probably didn't want a career lecturing, but at that point I was still really interested in research, really interested broadly in health promotion, but not sure exactly what I wanted to do. So I think leaving my PhD was hard. I think, like everyone, you finish and you feel on top of the world and you think, oh, I can do anything. And I think I had pretty much no idea really what I wanted to do. And probably like a lot of people, you find yourself, it's almost hard to have the headspace to think about what is it you actually want to do. You're kind of so busy finishing your PhD. And so for me, it was also a little bit difficult that I was trying to move back to the UK at that time as well. So I kind of just almost couldn't really sort of think about looking for jobs. And so my post-PhD time, I think I'd probably, if I had to give it a title, it would be a move back to the UK, definitely a post-PhD despair, and finally a job, which wasn't really my first choice, but I think it was a good door opener. And so when I came back to the UK, I moved to Cambridge because my partner was living here, and I think I found it harder than I thought to find a job. I think, like Rick, I was probably in default mode that a postdoc or researcher positioned within academia seemed the most logical. And so I ended up working as a research associate in the behavioural science group. And so this was at the University of Cambridge. Unfortunately, the job that I wanted, I didn't get. I fluffed up an interview. It was the perfect job. It was an intervention developer in physical activity in primary care settings. I went for the interview. I think I put way too much pressure on myself. And it was awful. It was probably one of those experiences that it just still gives me nightmares. So I didn't get the job and I was devastated. However, they phoned to say, would you be interested in more of a study coordinator role? The only problem is that it's part-time, but it's on the same project, and potentially you can also be involved in writing up papers. And so I took it, and it was a good thing that I did, actually, because then it enabled me to also have another part-time position at St Mary's University. And then following that, about a year later, I did get an intervention developer job within the same group. So I think it was definitely a door opener to be able to do that first position. So then I worked as an intervention developer on the Propel study, and this was developing an mHealth intervention as part of a type 2 diabetes group education intervention program. So I worked there for 2 years. And during this time, or towards the end of that position, this was probably the first time that I was starting to consider a change. So I was enjoying the projects, and specifically, I really was enjoying the concept of digital health. And I started to think, is this an option outside of academia? So unlike Rick, the programming side of things that just definitely wasn't for me. I'm computer illiterate. So it was more in the kind of intervention development side of things. And I applied for a job as a research manager at a startup company, and they were developing an app for, it was a CBT app for improving sleep behavior and treating insomnia. And this was my first experience that I'd ever had of an interview outside academia. And it was fine. It was good. I realized that my skills were I probably had more specific skills than they needed. But I think learning some hard truths was that people just really didn't care about publications as much as I maybe assumed that they would. And also, I think this was quite a tricky thing, that probably what you did in your PhD. So this was, all the things that I was talking about, what I did in my PhD, some of the things I'd done in my postdoc, they didn't really care about that, which actually might be a good thing. And I think this can be quite liberating. So at that point, I realized that behavioral science was still growing in popularity, but that there didn't really seem to be that many opportunities. And I think I realized at that point that probably wasn't the right job for me, and I decided to stay on in academia. So following this, in 2014, this was how I ended up at CEDAR. So this was, I would say, the right place, the right time, and the right project. It was the Creating Active School Environments with Esther van Sluis. And this was a really great opportunity. So it came up, it was a project that I was interested in. It linked back to some of the work I'd been doing during my PhD. And like my previous research associate positions, this probably had more links with policy. It had more work engaging with stakeholders, and a bit more on, I'd say, just more teamwork and working in schools, working with teachers. It was some of the stuff that I really enjoyed. And so, like Rick, my time in CEDAR had great colleagues, really good development opportunities, and a project that I really enjoyed, and also a fairly good publication record. So I guess why the need for a change? So my first experience of, I put in inverted commas, consultancy. So while I was doing a postdoc in CEDAR, an opportunity came up to do some consultancy just outside of work. So it was just during evenings and weekends. And this was with another friend and colleague who was interested in the same work. So we ended up almost purely by chance and just speaking to people, working as independent research consultants. So this was for a Drinkaware, who are an independent alcohol charity in the UK. And so what they were interested in was an evaluation of their app. So they designed an app to help people manage their alcohol intake. So this would require quantitative and qualitative research methods. So this was quite an interesting experience on a lot of levels. It was really good to still be doing research and still be doing things that we felt fairly comfortable with. The analysis was fairly basic. We were just looking at usage data on the app. And we were also analysing qualitative data, thematic analysis. And what they wanted were 2 internal reports and a publication. So this was quite useful because it was still research, but what we had to do was adapt to meet their needs and expectations, which were quite different than what we were used to in academia. And what I really liked was how innovative as a team were and responses to our findings. So if we made some suggestions, they would then say, okay, so how do we translate this into app features? What should this look like? How should we best go about it? And this, I really, really enjoyed it. It was hard work to fit this in alongside doing a postdoc. I think for quite a few, probably about 2 months, pretty much every weekend was taken up doing this. But I think it was quite good experience just to get a little bit of exposure to work outside academia. So then, like Rick, I think I had about 1 year left of my career development fellowship, and I think I probably started to panic a little bit. Again, I wasn't actively looking for a job, but I thought, well, I've got a year to go. I should probably start to see what's out there. So are there careers in policy that might be of interest, or research, but outside of academia? And I think this really forced me to just sit down and really think about what it is I actually really enjoy about my current job. And this was definitely a focus on the psychology, the behaviour change and behaviour change theory. I really enjoyed intervention development. And I think closely related to that is the idea of problem solving, relating to sort of complex behavioural issues and coming up with solutions. I really enjoyed the work that I was being exposed to about communicating to different audiences. So that ranges from students and teachers all the way through to policymakers. And the same goes for working with others. And probably when I really thought about it, I made a list of what it is I don't enjoy quite as much. And I don't mind writing papers, but I think the sort of focus on publication I found a little bit frustrating. And I really enjoy teamwork and working with other people. And I think probably in academia, there's not quite as much of that. And also the same goes for variety. I think being exposed to a little bit more of consultancy outside of academia made me realise that I quite like being involved in multiple projects. And finally, the last one was limited action or tangible outcomes. So I should say that then it was with about a year to go, I signed up for the University College London, so the UCL Centre for Behaviour Change. And if anyone's interested in broadly health psychology and behaviour change, it's quite a good mailing list and a good website. And it was actually through that I saw an email that said a company in Cambridge were looking for a consultant in behavioural science. And I thought, well, that sounds really good. And I clicked on the link and had pretty much no idea what the company was. It was sufficiently vague. So like Rick, I think preparation is key. And for this interview, I really wanted to learn from some of my previous mistakes. So I went to the careers service at Cambridge, and they were really good. I think I went for a couple of practice interviews where they film you, they provide a lot of feedback on some of your responses. And it was the most painful process, but it really was one of the best experiences. It forced me to think about a lot of my transferable skills, including processing lots of information, the ability around data analysis, communication skills, presentation skills. And I really started to think about that. Another thing was about reading up on areas outside my domain. So when I looked at this company, I realized that yes, behavioral science is one aspect. And obviously my expertise is more in physical activity, broadly health psychology. But what are some of the other areas in behavioral science that might be of interest? So for example, behavioral economics, some things to do with nudge. These are all the kind of keywords and buzz terms that are being used in that area. So I think it was important to read up a little bit on those sorts of things. But with that in mind, it's okay not to know everything. I think people don't expect you to. And enthusiasm and interest goes a long way. Be really, enthusiastic about the company, read up on what they do, have a lot of questions. And I would just say be yourself. And I really don't think you need to apologise for an academic background. And I think actually, if you can be proud of it and show why it's actually an advantage to employ you, I think this is a good way to go. So I'll just tell you a little bit about Innovia technology and where I'm working now, and give a couple of examples about some of the projects that I've been working on, and hopefully you can see some of the ways in which some of the skills that I picked up in academia really fit and tie into this career as well. So Innovia is an innovation and technology company based in Cambridge. I think when I saw the word innovation consultancy, I think it sent shudders down my spine, and I thought, oh God, it's one of those consultancies that no one's really sure what they actually do. And I guess the best way to describe it is we're not a management consultancy, so we're not McKinsey or any of those. What they focus on is more improving business or organizational management. So what we do is we help businesses and companies solve more tangible problems relating to products or services, rather than management consultancies that help businesses run more effectively. So hopefully that says the difference. And I guess the way I would best describe it is that companies come to us with problems that generally are keeping them awake at night. So the really big problems relating to some of their products or services. And so in that respect, we're probably quite similar to companies such as IDEO or Ideas 42. So we have a range of people with backgrounds in science and technology, experts in engineering, product design, business and strategy. And then in the top right-hand corner, we also have a motivation and behavioral quadrant, which is obviously where I sit. So we work for some quite big clients, mostly US-based. And I think being a consultancy, we're not claiming to be experts in any of these specific fields. So we draw from people who have experiences across a lot of sectors. But I think the thing that probably makes it work quite well is that a lot of consultancy is, and especially around innovation, is taking what you know from one field and potentially applying it and seeing if it applies to other fields as well. So I think when I first started, I was really worried that, all I know about is health and health psychology. How on earth am I going to be useful for anything, in consumer goods? But actually, I'll talk about a few case studies on the next few slides. But there really is a lot of things that have been really useful for that. So as one example, this was a case study, and this was done before I joined Innovia, but it was one of the case studies on the website that really stood out to me and made me think that it was probably quite a good fit for me. So this challenge was with P&G, and the challenge was to get Chinese men to wet shave, which has been a difficult problem. Most use an electric razor because there's a perception generally that wet shaving is old-fashioned and inconvenient. So in this project, they looked at the science of shaving and also the behavioral science. So really taking an in-depth look at the target consumers. And what was interesting was that they used the theory of planned behavior to underpin a lot of the concepts and the key messages. So for example, they realized that they had to change social norms. They had to give a better impression of changing attitudes around wet shaving. And also people just lacked any sort of confidence or skill to engage in wet shaving opposed to electric shaving. And so this is a fairly typical project for Innovia. It's quite holistic. It has some aspects of science and design coupled with behavioral science. So with behavioral science at Innovia, I think the best way to describe it is that we see ourselves as almost a bridge between a company's R&D and marketing team. So for example, R&D tend to understand the science and tech, but know less about user experience. Marketing on the other side of the bridge tend to understand the user, but not particularly in a systematic or rigorous way. And the aim really is that any sort of problem is we're trying to influence behavior in some way. So do we want consumers to switch brands, buy something new, do less of something, do more of something? There really is a lot of behavioral science in a lot of the challenges that we're faced with. So this probably looks quite similar to an academic process. I think generally speaking, when we approach a product, we use a lot of analysis of scientific theory. We read a lot of papers still. We generate testable hypotheses that then we can test these propositions either in focus groups or using other research methods with consumers. And then a lot of our work is about creating effective interventions or solutions to come up to hopefully address these problems. And the focus really is on behavior. So we're different than any sort of market research company in that we're not just focusing on attitudes and beliefs. And I think what makes us a little bit different as well is that, we only focus on the factors that really drive behavior. So I think this is where the systematic and rigorous process really comes into it. So this makes us hopefully a bit different to general kind of market research companies. So with behavioral science at Innovia, I'll give a couple of examples on the next slide around a couple of projects that I've been working on. But we use a lot of theoretical models. So same as what I was doing in a postdoc, we use the behavior change wheel, the combi model, We use a lot of academic insight, so I'm still reading quite a lot of papers on a regular basis. But the only difference is that we probably couple this with more creativity and behavioral design. So we work with design teams and come up with like ideation sessions and really different approaches to problem solving. So hopefully this just shows a little bit how some of the aspects are really, really similar to academia, especially on the rigorous and scientific side. But in the creativity and behavioral design, that's maybe a little bit different to anything I was doing before. I think the first 3 months, as Rick said, I definitely had imposter syndrome. The first 3 months were taken up by a lot of training in various things. There were a lot of ups and downs. I think some days I come home and think, oh, it was really good today. I spoke up in a meeting and I didn't make a fool of myself. But generally, I sort of felt like I was thrown in the deep end. I was sent off on trips quite early on, which was probably a good thing. But I definitely had the imposter syndrome for a couple of months. More recently, I've been working on a few projects, and some, again, quite similar to the field that I was working in before. So they're not been physical activity or diet related, but quite a few examples of working in health fields. But I've also had some new experiences, so helping companies to better communicate their technology to consumers. I've been involved in a project that's been reading patents and looking at IP, and this is a process called a competitive attack, where you pose as a competitor with the aim of helping a company to kind of strengthen their intellectual property. So quite a range of examples of projects. So the pros and cons, I think this is probably in some ways quite similar to what Rick was saying. There's a lot less flexibility than academia. We have timesheets to fill in. I felt like in academia I could sort of manage my time, had a little bit more control of it. And like Rick, there's probably less rigor. And I think just accepting that sometimes things just have to be good enough. Everything's quite time dependent, and some projects might only last for 3 or 4 weeks. And also a con might be that we have fairly limited evaluation. So clients quite often don't want to evaluate things as properly as maybe we would recommend that they do. But I think in the pros, I would definitely say that it's been more variety, a lot more challenging in certain respects. So I think probably that just goes with working in new fields and applying my knowledge to different areas, and also better teamwork. So I think this has really been, I work with chemists, physicists, I work with designers, graphic designers. There's pretty much never a project where it's just behavioral science or just psychology. And I think, like Rick, I really like the fact that there's quite tangible outcomes and endpoints. So just before we go into the final section, where Rick and I will both talk about some our major tips and tricks for anyone who's thinking to change careers. I just put a slide together specifically on consultancy and if you think this is right for you. And I had a little think about some of the key things, or what will be some of the key factors to take into account. And I think if you're generally a bigger picture thinker rather than detail focused, I think consultancy might be a good place to start. And also if you enjoy multiple projects simultaneously. So if you find yourself maybe frustrated with just working on 1 or maybe 2 projects in academia. I think the teamwork is quite a big thing, as well as communication. So communication with different clients, different audiences, really tailoring your work and your feedback appropriately. And finally, a preference for variety and change. So if you like that 1 week you'll be working in one sector, maybe in health, another week you might be applying your knowledge to change consumer behavior relating to, I don't know, in the Gillette example, razors, for example. It's this change and variety. It's quite fast paced. And finally, with the interactions and meetings. So I would say one thing about consultancy, there's not much lone working. a lot of the day is taken up with different meetings, ideation sessions, working in project rooms, and kind of working together. So these would just be some of the things to consider if you were thinking about consultancy as a potential change. So hopefully that's given a little bit of a flavour into my experiences of moving from academia into the private industry. I think some of the things were quite similar to Rick, but also a few differences as well. On the next few slides, we just have a few examples of our top tips for making a change in academia. And Rick, please shout in when if you want to add anything.
Yes, I think we should run through them fairly quickly, so there is also some room for questions. But yeah, we do have quite a few top tips for making a change. I think the first one is indeed be curious, and although change can be pretty hard, just be curious and probably just dare to go for it. I think what's really key in everything, I mean, whether you decide to stay in academia or whether you decide to switch, I think it's really important that you just choose what you really enjoy and what you dislike. And it may very well be that it is academia, and it may very well be that it's industry. And yeah. So
I think I would say as well that if you when you're considering what you really want, or what is it that you'd really want from a career change, is it that you're looking for more responsibility perhaps? Is it a specific industry that you either want to work in or don't want to work in? So I think just the combination of thinking about what it is you really enjoy and what it is you really want from a career. So that probably goes hand in hand with thinking about your values as well.
Yes, it should. And also it's so one of the things is what's really important is that that you should really be confident that you do have a lot of skills that you can use, and we just listed a few of them, but you can probably come up with much more skills. In applying for a job, it's also very important to give an example sometimes about the skill and how you used it and how you developed it. So yeah.
And I think the last point actually was just about, I think both Rick and I said that we probably start looking for a job quite a bit before you need one. I think even a year before your, potentially if your postdoc position's finishing, just start looking for one. But I would say don't settle for anything. I think I put a caveat there of it might, if it is a door opener and you think maybe I'll take this one with a view to moving on within an organization, that's fine. But don't settle for the first thing that comes available if it's not quite right. It's better to wait until it's a good fit. Okay, shall I move on? Okay.
Yes, so for me this was really important also to know. Actually, I've been one of the big transitions for me was also from the Netherlands to Cambridge. So the change can be really unsettling, and it was pretty hard this first change. And only in Cambridge I learned about this process of change. I've been through stuff again. I think it's very important to know that that it's perfectly normal that you sometimes feel and think like, oh, what have I done? I should go back. That's something that happens when you move your own boundaries, and that's what you do when you take steps. For me, that was really important to actually know, and it made my change from academia to industry much easier, I think. And if you base it on your own research and your values, I think you are probably making a good choice. in whatever transition you make.
I think we had on this slide just an example of just going for interviews, and the experience I think that you get from just being exposed to different types of interviews is quite important. So I would say go for interviews even if potentially the job isn't 100% right, but you're just thinking about it, on the surface seems like it could be a good fit. I would say go for it.
And interviews in business can be a bit different from academia, so that's one of the reasons why you can do some practice interviewing. Yeah,
I think my interview for the current job was I went there and had an hour case study. So I went in and had 45 minutes in a room with an example of a previous project, and it was basically 45 minutes to talk about how I would solve it or how I would approach it, what theories and models I would use, and steps from that, and then talking through it. So it was a little bit different to an academic interview in that respect.
Yeah, and you can also expect case studies, etc., that you really need to really do. So or presenting, like you have to present something.
I think with the CV tweaking, I think like Rick said, CVs are very different in business in general. I think my problem with the first few jobs I applied for, my CV was way too long. I think 2 pages is probably a good thing. Maybe 1 or 2 publications, but I think a focus on I think how you frame the information in your CV as well. So within the job that I was applying for in behavioural science, I talked about behavioural interventions. I talked about behavioural science more generally, rather than just specifically talking about physical activity interventions, for example. So I think it's just using the right sort of language and jargon as well that can be quite important.
Yeah. And indeed get some experience if it's possible. So I did this through some portfolio building in my weekends, but also some consultancy experience. Like Katie really did this much more than I did, but I also got some consultancy experience. And there is some question about this as well. Arthur is asking us, how do you get involved in such consulting experience? How did we do this? Was it the supervisor or bosses introducing us to such opportunities, or did we approach them ourselves? So maybe you can.
Yeah, for me it was done completely independently of my career development fellowship. I think in hindsight I probably should have been a bit more open that I was doing it on the side, but I think for me it came up through another colleague that had some experience of working with the same company, so Drinkaware. What I would so at Cambridge anyway, there is I can't remember the specific name of the organisation, but it's basically a consultancy, or Cambridge Enterprise, I think it's called. Mm-hmm. And they specifically ask students or postdocs to sign up if they do want to do some consultancy outside. And in hindsight, that would have been a really good route, because they take away all the issues to do with contracts. They would draw up a contract for you. They would recommend what you should be charging. They would take away all the hassle. I think they only take a really small percentage of what you actually earn, but I think they just make sure that it's all done properly. And I think a lot of universities probably have something similar, some sort of consultancy or enterprise sector. We didn't have that, and it worked out okay, but I think we massively undercharged for what we were doing, and it ended up being a lot more work. We ended up doing more work than what we initially contracted for, and I think we just didn't really have the confidence to maybe to say no. So I think getting advice would be a good thing.
Yeah, and for me actually, I use my own network for it. Actually, the questions came from my own network. what I did was I talked to my supervisor about this, and he agreed to do this on actually on the university at that moment. So that was in Rotterdam. So the municipality was a collaborator actually, and they had just a different question, and thought, well, how can we actually conduct some research on this? So this was like the use and appreciation of some services to promote physical activity, which is really out of the scope of my of academic research. But yeah, so I used my own network and actually embedded it within the department I was working in. And in Cambridge, my supervisor arranged this. But it's, I think in general, if you want to do things like this, probably your supervisor will be approached for similar jobs quite often. So if you're interested in consultancy kind of things, you may really ask your supervisor if there is an opportunity to do so.
Definitely.
There's also Katie, can you please repeat the section about behavior change, the behavior change mailing link from
Yes, from UCL.
Yeah.
So that is the UCL Centre for Behaviour Change. So
and that's
you sign up to their, so you can go onto their website and sign up to their to be on their mailing list. So they would send, I think, probably weekly updates of been to some conferences there, just one-day events. They've generally been quite useful, and I'd say if you think that you're generally interested in behaviour change and health psychology, that side of things, I think it's a good thing to. They post a lot of jobs as well, both inside and outside of academia.
Yes. There is one other question. I'm finishing my postdoc in a couple of months, but I feel a bit lost to what kind of jobs I should be looking for outside of academia. Where do we begin with trying to figure out what kind of job exists that could be of interest? Yeah, that's well, probably you should. Well, what at least Career Service in Cambridge offered was a service in which they actually well, you could fill in a questionnaire, a test actually, and see what kind of jobs fit with you. So there are a lot of companies that actually offer these services. At least you get an idea what fields there are.
I would also say LinkedIn might be useful as well. Like, I know that it's not necessarily the most useful for academic positions, but I think even signing up to some of the discussion groups on LinkedIn. So I think there's one specifically on e-health or digital health more broadly. There's I think you can also set up various things around job adverts on LinkedIn. I think some tend to maybe not be, you get a lot of rubbish through there as well, but it's just another way of, especially if it's outside of academia. But I think even it is worth noting that I've had a few friends who've made a career transition outside of academia that they've actually got the job by just contacting a company that they want to work with and are interested in, and just sort of talked about, you know, their expertise in behavioural science and behaviour change and intervention development, and actually ended up having a job almost created for them. And I think, especially in the field of behavioural science, it's quite a new field. So I think it's always worth, if you see a company that you think seems like a really good company that does things that are relevant to what your interests are, I think it's just worth contacting them and talking to them in person, because you just never know what, even if they don't have a job now, you know, you'll just be in their minds.
Yeah. Okay. We will just turn on our videos so that you can actually see who's talking.
Yes. Also, when I look at the time, Katie and Rick, I would suggest to finish off this webinar.